A new single-day high of 108 COVID-19 cases in the city. The government to further tighten measures to stem the surge in infections, including civil servants working from home again. And HKDSC candidates may have to check their results online this year.
Hello and a very good evening. Hong Kong health authorities today reported 108 new cases of COVID-19, another single-day high, with 83 of them being locally acquired infections.
The new patients come from all walks of life, and almost half of them have unknown sources of infection. As Caleb Leung reports, the numbers may not even fully reflect the city's epidemic situation.
The number of confirmed infections has hit the three-digit mark for the first time, and the Center for Health Protection said the figure is not the latest.
Cut-off time was advanced from 4 p.m. today to midnight last night because there are too many cases, and we have yet to complete information gathering. So if we use 4 p.m. as the cut-off time today, there should have been more cases.
Among the confirmed cases is one more staff member of Two Moon Eye Center. 3 clerks of the Eye Center were already confirmed infected yesterday. All 4 worked in offices on the ground floor of the center. The hospital authorities said the facility will be temporarily closed on Monday. In addition, the endoscopy center of St. Teresa's Hospital was also closed after one of its staff members was confirmed infected, while another employee was initially confirmed. Also worth noting is a confirmed patient who works at the Jockey Club headquarters in Happy Valley. The Jockey Club said the staff member last worked in the office 6 days ago and had since been working from home. It has arranged virus tests for other employees who had close contact with her. Those who work on the same floor as the infected employee will isolate themselves for 14 days, while the Jockey Club will carry out disinfection work at the headquarters. As for taxi drivers, one of the 4 high-risk groups of people, the CHP said 3 more drivers were confirmed infected. Starting today, 4 specimen collection centers were set up to take swab samples from cabbies. At the Yau Ma Tei government car park, taxi drivers lined up to get tested inside temporary booths. If a driver is tested positive, the test provider will contact the transport department as well as the CHP. These centers are open 7 days a week and will remain in operation until August 1st. Caleb Leung, TVB News.
Well, the government will further tighten measures in a bid to stem the recent surge in COVID-19 infections. Starting tomorrow, many civil servants will again work from home for at least a week.
The ban on dining services at eateries after 6 p.m. will be extended for 7 days. The government is also working to make face masks mandatory in all indoor public areas. Haley Joe has more.
Starting tomorrow, many civil servants will be working from home again, with non-essential and non-emergency public services suspended at least until July 26th. Calling the current situation more critical than ever, Chief Executive Carrie Lam has announced a number of new measures to slow down the spread of the virus.
I don't want the public to get wrong impression that means that civil servants don't have to go to work at all. Actually, close to 60% of civil servants will have to continue to provide essential and emergency services.
Up until Friday night, the Chief Secretary for Administration had been saying there was no such plan despite calls for the work-from-home arrangement. But the civil service chief rejected accusations of a delayed response.
Now we have sufficient supply of masks, protective equipment, and also measures in the offices as regards the partitions and all that. As we observe the trend, we of course we noticed that about the increasing number of cases, that the situation is actually very severe, and that warrant further tightening up measures.
The government also announced it has been working to extend mandatory mask wearing from public transport to all indoor public areas.
Colleagues are now working with DOJ, working very closely on writing the legislation and also directions. So we'll continue to work on it and try to issue as soon as possible.
In addition, the ban on dine-in services after 6 p.m. at eateries will be extended for another week until July 29th. Meanwhile, some infectious disease experts have warned that those exempted from mandatory quarantine upon their arrival in the city could be a source of infection. The CE gave her response.
People have somehow put the blame on these exemption categories for the latest wave of this COVID-19, which is not substantiated. And the exemptions categories are related to the daily living of Hong Kong people and the continued economic activities in Hong Kong. So it is not quite right to say that this is a gap, this is deliberate, this was provided for under the ordinance.
The government also said it would offer necessary support for elderly people staying at home. Haley Zhou, TVB News.
The Food and Health Chief says the city's situation of COVID-19 infections demands our utmost vigilance. Kana Chu has more.
Amid consecutive days of record-breaking infection numbers and death tolls, the novel coronavirus could be here to stay. How do you comment or assess the situation we're in right now?
Yeah, the situation is actually quite severe. The spread in terms of the geographical location and also the spread of the, for example, workplace and restaurants and all that are quite diverse.
And what could that suggest about the government's efforts in reading in the spread of COVID-19?
Looking at the experience of other countries, actually when we resume, some of these activities, whether it is economic activities or social activities, there is always a resurgence. So Hong Kong is currently in this stage.
Would you think there was any loophole in terms of, for example, exempted persons who were let in Hong Kong without observing a 14-day quarantine?
Well, we have completely tightened, the measures for the exempted persons. Most of these people are actually like crew, sea crew, or also air crew. While there is a necessity for these people to be exempted, but we try to be very, very vigilant.
As part of the government's suppress and lift strategy, arrivals from high-risk regions are now required to prove themselves COVID-free, in addition to securing a 14-day hotel reservation prior to setting foot on the city. 3 private labs, including 2 on the Chinese mainland, have also been tasked with conducting COVID-19 assessments on 4 groups of people deemed at high risk of contracting the disease. With each test costing only a fraction of the market price, Sophia Chan anticipates more public-private partnerships to beef up disease detection. Speaking of hospital quarantine and holding facilities, what happens if we hit the maximum capacity of those places?
For the Penny's Bay quarantine facilities, we will start using. There are 800 units. That is about 1,600 beds. So while increasing, we are also looking into the model of quarantining, taking into consideration some of the international experience.
In the worst-case scenario, people could be forced to stay at home. Kana Chu, TVB News.
A newly built quarantine facility at Penny's Bay on Lantau Island is expected to be ready for use later this week. Chief Secretary for Administration Matthew Chung said on his blog it would provide 800 units as existing quarantine facilities are expected to be filled up quickly amid a sharp rise in COVID-19 infections in the city. He said another 700 units would be set up by the end of September. The site was reserved for Hong Kong Disneyland's development project, but has been idle for years.
Well, the outbreak is also affecting the more than 50,000 who sat the Diploma of Secondary Education Examination, or DSE. Those pupils may now have to check their results online this year. Once again, here's Kana Chu.
The examination process of the Diploma of Secondary Education is over and done with, but the release of results slated for next Wednesday may inevitably go digital. That's to ensure students don't make contact with each other.
Usually on that day, all students will go back to school to collect their results. And then the students may console each other or may congratulate each other, so there'll be a lot of social contact. And we're asking schools to take special measures to make sure that students don't have to go back to school as fast as possible. Instead, students could learn about their DSE results online through, say, the school's electronic bulletin board.
Some students lamented how the pandemic has disrupted their plans to pursue a higher education. For this DSE taker, the greatest obstacle is from the reduced opportunities to ask teachers questions as a result of school suspensions. A college student-to-be, he also worries about connectivity issues at home affecting his online interview performance. Citing the scrapping of oral assessments and one history paper question, Po Shing, a student guidance consultant for Hokkiao Club, anticipates more paper will need rechecking this year. But he reminded students to manage their expectations and plan ahead. That's because less than 2% of students that have exams marked again actually improve their score. According to a blog post published by Secretary for Education Kevin Young, roughly 52,600 full-time locally accredited sub-degree program seats are on offer in the 2020-2021 academic year. That's expected to fulfill the studying needs of about 44,600 DSE candidates from day schools. Kana Chu, TVB News.
Well, global COVID-19 deaths have now topped 600,000 and the number of infections have surpassed 14 million. The worst hit countries remain the United States and Brazil.
America has about 3.8 million coronavirus cases and roughly 140,000 deaths. Brazil's death tally is 78,000 with a caseload in excess of 2 million. Peter Caveus tells us more.
Deaths in the United States from the novel coronavirus continue to rise in the majority of the 50 states. The U.S. is losing about 5,000 people to the virus every week. One of the hardest hit areas is Florida. The state reported more than 10,000 new cases Saturday. A daunting figure, but down from a record 15,300 on July 12th. The consistently high infections forced hard-hit Miami Beach to enforce a curfew in a busy entertainment district to try to stem the spread of COVID-19.
We have a lot of folks who aren't necessarily complying with the mandates and the orders to wear a face cover and to have that social distancing. So we're hoping that by closing earlier, it actually tones down the party and it will allow these folks to go home, go back to their hotels, wherever they're staying, and possibly keep everyone else around them, everyone else in our city safe.
Meanwhile, in Brazil, President Jair Bolsonaro praised the work of his interim health minister, an army logistics expert with no health experience, and Bolsonaro's third health minister since the pandemic began. At one point, while speaking to reporters outside the presidential palace, he said depression kills more than the virus, and that, regrettably, people are going to die. Despite contracting the coronavirus earlier this month, Bolsonaro has consistently downplayed COVID-19 severity, referring to it as a little flu. He also stated that strict social distancing measures that sacrifice jobs and income will ultimately be more harmful than the virus itself. Bolsonaro further pushed hydroxychloroquine in treating the virus. The far-right president said he's taking the medication along with an anti-parasite drug to fight the coronavirus. Hydroxychloroquine is the drug championed by U.S. President Donald Trump. Earlier, scientists found the malaria drug not effective for early treatment of mild COVID-19. Peter Caveus, TVB News.
People in the Australian city of Melbourne must now wear masks when leaving their homes. The edict comes as COVID-19 cases in the Australian state of Victoria, of which Melbourne is the capital, have risen again. State authorities recorded 363 new cases in the past 24 hours. The country's second most populous state has seen 2 weeks of triple-digit increases. Melbourne is already in the midst of a partial 6-week lockdown, affecting almost 5 million people. The new mask order becomes mandatory Wednesday for anyone leaving their home for exercise of purchasing essential goods. Anyone not complying will be fined $200 Australian. Victoria is the first state in Australia to require masks for part of its population.
And still ahead on tonight's news, a fatal fire at a Kwai Chung HOS housing block this morning. In France, a 15th century cathedral damaged in a suspected arson case. And former civil rights activist and Congressman John Lewis dies. Warm welcome back to TVB News. A fire broke out at a Kwai Chung residential flat this morning, leaving a woman dead and some others injured.
Some 300 people were evacuated from the building during the blaze. Pinky Wong has more.
The fire broke out in the 5th floor flat at Kwai Chung Court at around 7 this morning. The blaze was upgraded to a number 3 alarm half an hour later. Heavy smoke enveloped the area at the height of the fire. More than 160 firefighters and emergency services personnel were sent to the scene. The fire services deployed 2 breathing apparatus teams and 2 water jets to combat the blaze. The fire was put out at around 8:30 a.m. Firefighters found the body of a woman in the bedroom of the flat. They believe the fire started in the living room. Hong Tak-shing, acting divisional officer of New Territory South, said the blaze was fierce when firefighters arrived at the scene. They encountered difficulty in entering the unit as there were objects blocking the door. Sources said the woman found dead in the apartment was in her 30s. She lived with her parents, but they were not in the flat at the time of the fire. A firefighter felt unwell after inhaling smoke and was treated on the spot. Some other residents who were injured in the fire were sent to Princess Margaret Hospital for treatment. This woman said she couldn't get out of her flat when she heard the fire alarm and noticed a burning smell. I was taken out by the firefighters, she added. The Fire Services Department will set up an investigation team to look into the cause of the fatal fire. Pinky Wong, TVB News.
Responding to online calls, some people gathered in Yuen Long this afternoon to mark almost a year since the mob attacks in and around the West Rail Station there. A march was scheduled to start from Yuen Long Station at 2 p.m, but riot police sealed off the scene, asking people, including district councillors of the area, to go home. That as the police accused the group of breaching the gathering ban, issuing tickets in the process. At a nearby bus terminal, scuffles broke out between police and the crowd. Officers tackled the people with multiple rounds of pepper spray. They also stopped and searched some members of the press and checked their press cards. Overseas again, investigators in France suspect arson may be the cause of a fire that burned a 15th century cathedral in Nantes. The blaze at the iconic Gothic cathedral of St. Peter and St. Paul started on Saturday morning. It took more than 100 firefighters several hours to control the flames. The fire blew out stained glass windows and destroyed the church's grand organ. Luckily, no one was hurt. Officials say 3 fires have been set and are treating the incident as a criminal act. It was not the first time fire has damaged the cathedral. It was partly destroyed during World War II in 1944 after Allied bombings. In 1972, a fire completely ravaged its roof. It was finally rebuilt 13 years later, with a concrete structure replacing the ancient wooden roof.
Flags are flying at half-mast in many states across America in tribute to former civil rights activist and Congressman John Lewis, who died on Friday after a battle with cancer.
And even US President Donald Trump sent his condolences despite his public spat with Lewis at the time of his inauguration. Tributes continue to pour in for John Lewis, who died days ago after a battle with pancreatic cancer. Former presidents and scores of lawmakers have publicly remarked on the passing of the civil rights activist and former congressman. But it took current US President Donald Trump more than 14 hours after Lewis's death to offer his and the First Lady's condolences in a 2-sentence Twitter message. Unsurprisingly, the two did not get along. Lewis memorably tangled with Trump days before the president's inauguration in 2017. He said he did not see Trump as a legitimate president. That prompted Trump to blast Lewis as all talk and denigrate his majority black district as crime-infested and falling apart. Still, the White House and other places around the country ordered flags to fly at half-staff, including in Lewis's home state of Georgia, with the governor there saying he changed our world in profound and immeasurable ways. Activists within the movement for Black Lives remembered the legacy left behind by Lewis.
Anybody that has ever been in his presence feels the full weight of history on his shoulders.
We have been in the streets, and same tactics of the police, being used against us as a way to deter us from fighting for Black freedom. And yet that never deterred Congressman Lewis. He has always been on the right side of history over and over and over again.
And it was people like John Lewis who showed me why I had to do that and how to keep fighting even though that pain and that trauma is deeply real.
Lewis, who died Friday at the age of 80, was the youngest and last survivor of the Big Six civil rights activists who organised the 1963 March on Washington. He spoke shortly before the group's leader, Martin Luther King Jr., gave his I Have a Dream speech to a vast sea of people.
And that's the news. Thanks for watching.
Have a very good night. Bye.